On today's show, going to talk to you about the Nuggets offseason roster math, roster spots that are available, what you can expect. We're also going to talk about lessons from the Celtics and the Bucks, two recent winners, and what we should learn from them as the Denver Nuggets. And then, of course, owners are swimming in cash as evidenced by firing a coach with $70 million left on his contract. We're going to talk about what that means as well on Locked On Nuggets.
You are Locked On Nuggets, your daily Denver Nuggets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is up, everybody? Welcome to the Locked On Nuggets podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, Adam Matas, flying solo today. Matt Moore's got the day off, but wanted to get a couple topics into you here before I wrap up my week on Locked On Nuggets. We appreciate you making this your first listen each and every day. We're free and available wherever you get your podcast. So the Celtics are the winners. They get it done. Not really a surprise. They dominated from start to finish, finished off the job, looked impressive all the way through, including, and in my opinion, especially in the finals. I want to get to them here in a little bit, but I wanted to start with some Nugget stuff because I know not everybody cares about the broader NBA picture. So I wanted to start with just some simple math about the Nuggets roster situation. Let's go through it here. To start, the Nuggets have 11 players on the roster, or will have, in my opinion, 11 players on the roster by next week's, by the time the draft gets around. The two players who have player options, Reggie Jackson and KCP, I think the Nuggets are going 1-for-1 on those. I think Reggie opts in. I think KCP opts out. So that's where you get 11 players. Your starters, Jamal Murray, Michael Porter Jr., Aaron Gordon, Nikola Jokic. Then off the bench, 2 point guards, Reggie Jackson and Jalen Pickett, Julian Strawther, Christian Brown, Peyton Watson, Hunter Tyson, and then, of course, Zeke Naji. That's your 11 players that I believe will be on the Nuggets roster to kind of start the offseason. First up will be the draft. And I think at the draft, the Nuggets have 2 picks. They will probably select their late first-round pick and then their late second-round pick. My hunch is they use both picks. And there's always a chance, of course, they trade. I mean, all of this stuff, I don't even know if the Nuggets know the plan at the moment. You have to be flexible. You have to kind of wait and see. But I think the most likely scenario is that the Nuggets use both of those picks, one of them for a player, likely one of them for a two-way. I would be shocked if they drafted both players and had them on the roster, but we'll go through that here in a second. So 1 player, 1 on a two-way. That brings us up to 12 players on the roster. I think the next step, Nuggets go into trade season, and I think that the Nuggets are likely to trade 2 players. It doesn't mean this is for certain. There's a lot of different options here, but I think that Reggie Jackson and Zeke Naji are likely gone. Zeke Naji has been here and been given enough chances, although in my opinion, not very good chances. I think Michael Malone probably harmed his growth, but at the same time, Zeke had more than enough opportunity to make a name for himself. It didn't happen, so I think he is likely moving on. So I think they're going to try to get rid of Zeke, and my guess is that they also try to get rid of Reggie. One of the reasons I think you get rid of Reggie, I know the Denver Nuggets were not happy with Michael Malone playing Reggie Jackson all 82 games this year. That's not the plan. So if you brought him back, even if you had some sort of agreement of, yeah, but Pickett's going to start ahead of him, we're going to do this, I think that the Nuggets will take off the training wheel, so to speak, and just not have an option at point guard behind Jalen Pickett. That's my hunch. I could be wrong, but that's my hunch about what I think is going to happen. So you trade Reggie and Zeke. Zeke because he's expired more or less here in Denver. Reggie because I think you can't fully trust the coaching staff not to play him over your younger guys. And you go with Jalen Pickett. So that keeps it at 12 players. You trade 2. I think the likeliest is you get back 2. Those could be traded together for 1 player. I kind of more likely see it to be a 2-for-2 trade or a 2 separate 1 per player trades. But again, this is just what, in my opinion, is the most likely scenario. So then if you go to free agency, that leaves 3 roster spots open. And I think Denver is likely to bring back Vlatko Cancar. I think it's pretty likely that he'll be back here unless another team steals him, but I just don't see him coming off an injury, another team maybe going that far. But you never know. And I also think he probably wants to be back, and I think Denver wants him back. So Vlatko Cancar, I think, is up. That gets you to 13. I actually think Justin Holiday is likely back. Unlike Reggie Jackson, Michael Malone used Holiday in the way that I think, you would hope for. He's there in case of emergencies, but he wasn't playing over most guys. I mean, there were some games where he would start at the shooting guard position, and like Christian Brown, I think probably should have gotten those minutes. We talked about how Christian Brown only played 22 total minutes this entire season alongside 4 starters, which is absolutely insane. And some of that is because Michael Malone would play Holiday in those minutes. But I don't think that there's as much concern about Holiday stealing the development of some of their younger players, including Julian Strother and Hunter Tyson and those guys. So I don't see that. I think you probably want to have a veteran there. He's also a little bit older, good locker room guy, all of those things. I think he's back. So that leaves, if we just went through the entire roster, that leaves only one roster spot that would then be some new player. And by the way, as a friend of the show, Jake Coyne, explained on the DNVR Nugget show, it's possible Denver just doesn't fill that spot. You don't have to fill that spot. And in fact, sometimes when you're up against the second apron, you end up leaving that spot open anyway, and you just roll with 14 guys and then you're two ways. I think it's entirely possible Denver does that. It also maybe leaves them some flexibility down the road to sign a player. So I think they do it. So if you look at that, you're only talking about what I think is the most likely scenario. And again, when I say most likely, all of these things, if they all hit, it's still pretty unlikely. There's going to be some kind of curveball in the equation. But the most likely of every scenario gives Denver 14 or 15 players with only 2 or 3 new faces. 1, a free agent signing, and 2, whoever it is you trade for Reggie Jackson and Zeke Naji for. So to me, I look at that and I go, unless the Nuggets get a little bit wild, which, by the way, I think Calvin Booth is probably more likely than a Tim Conley, who's been at the helm for a majority of the Jokic era of these last 2 years. I think Calvin Booth is more likely to be bold, to make and the flip side of bold would be reckless, right? If it's a smart decision and a little out of the box, it's bold. If it's a crazy decision, it's outside the box, it's reckless. So whichever angle you want to kind of view, I think Calvin is more likely to be on that end of the spectrum as opposed to a Tim Conley, who I think was pretty conservative with making big swings. So I say all that to say that there is a real chance that from all indications, it doesn't seem to me like KCP will be back. I told you I don't like that. I would love for KCP to be back, even if you go into that second apron. We'll talk about it here in a second. But when signs are pointing that is probably more unlikely than likely, I still think Denver's roster shakeup is pretty minimal compared to, you get this idea in your head that the team is going to be completely different. I don't know that it necessarily will be. The difference in the team is largely going to become from rotation in the back line, playing more minutes with Strother, with Christian Brown, Peyton, and probably Jalen Pickett being the loudest one. And then whoever it is you trade Reggie and Zeke for, which we'll have to see what Michael Malone or what Calvin Booth does. There is, of course, always a chance that Denver gets a little crazy and makes a bigger swing, a Michael Porter, a Jamal Murray, even an Aaron Gordon, tries to piece one of those guys together and just completely shake up the roster. That is on the table more so than I think it was ever at any point in the Tim Conley era. But I still think it is not a very likely option at all. I think I would be pretty surprised if I saw anything like that as we got to it. Oh, look, Miroslav says it's good timing, cooking my famous chicken paprikash, and now I have something to listen to. He cooked this for me, by the way, while he was out here. And my oldest daughter was a huge fan. So when he was staying with me, he cooked this chicken paprikash, and my oldest daughter loved it. And she doesn't like anything. So score 1 for Miroslav on his side of the bracket. All right, let's take a quick break. On the other side, I want to dive into some lessons from the Celtics and Bucks, thinking about them as we watch them win the title here. We'll do that more on the other side of Locked On Nuggets. I have no idea how you do it. People do these solo every time. I have no idea how they do them so fast. Passion, drive, and patience, the formula for winning championships, is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. Superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED lights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back, because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to make your car the MVP and bring home huge wins. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay's Guaranteed Fit only available to U.S. customers. We'll be right back with more Locked On. Back here on Locked On Nuggets. So, the Celtics win. I know nobody loves the Celtics. Everybody likes to hate them. They're not quite as hateable as the LA Lakers, even the Phoenix Suns. They're not that high on my personal hate list. But I will say, and people outside of the U.S. don't know this, Boston has had an amazing run in my adult lifetime. I think they get their first championship. I don't even remember. I don't care the facts on this. Sometime in early 2000, they start getting their championships. And since that moment, they have won 7 NFL Super Bowls, a handful of World Series, NBA championships. They've got a little bit of everything. So they've been on an incredible heater. And that's what's more annoying than anything, is that you've got one city in America full of quarrelsome creatures who just have had this run that you can't even imagine. I can't even imagine getting 14, 15 championships in a 20-year run in a city. It's unthinkable. And I've even brought this up before, but I know that Barstool as a company started in Boston in the early 2000s. And whenever you think of successful businesses, and I know a lot of people like or hate Barstool or whatever, I don't care about that. I more look at this from a business perspective, obviously being in media. And I go, whether you love them or hate them, having the wind at your back for all those championships is enormous. Like if DNVR started and we were already up to like 7 championships in 4 years, you could imagine DNVR's trajectory would be even greater than what it is right now. So I look at that. So you look at the city of Boston and you go, unbelievable luck that they've had to have all of their teams get championships over this run. And they add another one with an entirely new cast of characters from their previous Celtics one. They add that over the stretch. I was impressed with the Celtics. The biggest surprise of the year for me, covering the NBA as a whole, not just the Denver Nuggets, obviously with Tim Legler on the All-NBA show, was that I kind of fell in love with the Celtics team. I've always not liked them, and there's some things they do that I don't like. I just don't like 5-out basketball. I'm a big man, so I don't like the idea of just all guards or bigs that play like guards. But there's no question that it's incredibly effective having all 5 guys who can shoot the 3 and can play out in the perimeter. And then number 2 is, and this is the part I hate the most, dribble drives have become such an important part of basketball because it's the easiest way to draw fouls. It's very hard to draw fouls in the post. It's hard to draw fouls off of, spot ups or what have you. Even off of pick and roll, it's hard to get fouls. But dribble drives against the scramble defense is the easiest way because the tiniest amount of contact, that's the one area where the NBA still calls a lot of fouls. So they play a brand of basketball that I don't necessarily love. But within that brand, I've been incredibly impressed with how they've developed as a team, the cohesive way in which they played. So if we look at this with the Celtics, and what did we learn? Well, first of all, after last season, they were incredibly aggressive and opportunistic. They've had a team that was in the conference finals or finals several years in a row, a young up-and-coming team. And rather than stay pat and just constantly run it back, they bring in new pieces. Obviously, Porzingis was a big piece. But prior to that, Derek White several years before. But then you get Porzingis. You had your core guys in Jalen, Tatum, and Brown. You had Al Horford, who was sort of the veteran guy there. Then you had some other pieces, behind the scenes. But when you add a Derek White and then years later you add a Porzingis and a Drew Holiday in an offseason, that's a huge splash. That was very aggressive. If Denver added the equivalent of a Drew Holiday and a Porzingis in 1 year, it would be the biggest offseason in Denver Nuggets history. Celtics did that, and I don't even know that was part of the blueprint. Drew Holiday fell into their lap. They had the flexibility to do that. And so when I say in the last segment that Denver's most likely scenario is this or this or this, things happen, and sometimes like quickly, like, oh my God, the Cavs just made a crazy signing or a crazy trade, and all of a sudden this new player is available, and the front office's ability to adapt to this new market, this new economy that's out there when new players become available and quickly find a way to fit them in. That's part of what makes a great front office. Boston did a great job of that. It's well known that they have a lot of smart people in the front office that take on different things. They're flexible with how they understand the salary cap and how they understand, how to make things work, type puzzle pieces, how to make them fit. So Drew Holiday falls into their lap, and it really was one of the biggest sort of crazy. If you asked a Celtics fan and like at this time last year, who's gonna be on your roster next year? Drew Holiday wouldn't have been on the radar, but then of course he becomes available. It's the perfect piece, and they have a slightly different identity. But what I think really made their identity different was that, one, Jaylen Brown made a huge leap, and it was a little later than I would have expected him to make a leap personally, to the degree that he had. These things kind of are linear when you talk about a player's growth, and then they flatten out over time, still going up a little bit. But after a player about age 24, 25, that growth usually becomes like intangible. It's about leadership and this or that. And then they'll add pieces of their game, like, oh, he added a little bit better handle or offhand. Jaylen Brown had some of those things, but something else clicked for him this year that took him to another level. And maybe it was just the spread out style of play that allowed him, getting rid of some of the guys like a Marcus Smart or something, maybe allowed him to be more aggressive. But I actually think the number one thing that allowed Jaylen Brown to make a sort of surprising leap at this stage of his career was Jason Tatum's change in play. And this to me is the big one, because for so long, I just thought Tatum, like I didn't believe in the Celtics because Tatum is their best player, Tatum in the clutch, you go to him and he's just not a high volume scorer. He seems to the stuff he does, he's like Joel Embiid. The stuff he does is great for 45 minutes, but not necessarily the last 3. Well, I saw earlier on, the very first comment on the show today was, my main takeaway is that having the best player in a series is not that important anymore. OKC, Nuggets, Knicks, and Mavs had the best players in series and playoffs that they lost. I think there's some truth to this, but I think it's overstated. Last year, the Nuggets having the best player in the playoffs last year was a big deal. That was a big reason why they were able to beat even teams like the LA Lakers. When you went into that series, you thought, well, I don't know, LeBron is almost always the best player in his series. Definitively not the case. And the team played a cohesive brand of basketball. Of course, we know how Nuggets basketball is, but Jokic being the best player was a big part of why they won. Nonetheless, I do agree with you that I think it is less true than eras before, or more true than eras before, that a balanced roster is more important. But I think a lot of that just has to do with, there's a lot of good players in the NBA. In eras past, and we're talking really like pre-2008, you would have always 1 or 2 guys. Like if you think about the Oklahoma City Thunder even, who made it to the NBA Finals in 2012. I believe by 2012, they still had Kendrick Perkins on the roster. You know, there were the Cavs in the late 2000s had Anderson Varejao on the roster and like playing heavy minutes and stuff. It used to be that you had much more narrowly defined skill sets. The NBA has become, in my opinion, more skilled and more flat, meaning that best player and worst player in your starting lineup is a little bit closer in terms of all-around talents. So I do think that's part of it. And the weak links are more important now, and the strong links probably less important, just relatively. But I still think that Denver has an enormous advantage at having the best player. And by the way, the Dallas Mavericks won the West. The West had a lot of good teams and a lot of good players. And Luka Doncic being as great as he was, especially in the conference finals, that was a big reason why they made it out of the West to begin with. So I think it's only partially true, but probably can be easily overstated. Nonetheless, the Celtics don't have one of those guys, in my opinion. They have, oh my God, are you kidding me? They have a player in, sorry, my Google just crashed on me, which is so ridiculous. So I don't have my notes. I'm going to have to pull them up on my phone. So I think that part of what happened was that Tatum was not good enough to be that guy, but took a little bit of a step back and it became more of a balanced roster. The result of that is that Jaylen Brown wins conference finals MVP and finals MVP. I don't think it's a big deal. I think that people are going to talk about this for a very short period of time and then move on. What can Denver learn from that? I actually liken both Jaylen Brown and Jason Tatum to Jamal Murray. And what I mean by that is Jaylen Brown's 27, Jamal Murray's 27. Jaylen Brown made what I would consider to be somewhat of a surprising leap in his abilities this year. And we're hoping for the same thing from Jamal. Jamal, I think, has a lot of headroom in how capable he is. I think Jamal I've talked about this. I think he's a massive underperformer. He should be better than what he is. So some of this is, even if he just takes some of it, is more disciplined this year, he should have a meaningful growth in the talent of a player. But where he compares, in my opinion, to Jason Tatum is that while Jason Tatum still led the team in field goal attempts and was still a really aggressive player, there was the right balance, in my opinion, for him and what his role was. He was not the savior of the team. In 2023, Jamal Murray was the savior of the team. Yoke's steady every night. Yoke's always the savior. But Murray did things that were so spectacular, it elevated you to the team to a new level. And I thought there were small moments in the Phoenix series and game 2 of the Heat series where I thought Jamal stepped outside those lines a little bit. And that was one of my storylines for those games was Murray looks to be a little too aggressive. And he still, even when he was playing at what is probably his apex as a player, there still were moments when he stepped outside those lines. So for me, there's this paradox with Murray where I think he can both become a better player and make a leap a la Jaylen Brown, while also better figuring out when to play that note a la Jason Tatum. You're asking for 2 very difficult things from a player, but I think both of those are on the table for him. Michael Porter, you could see a leveling up from him as well. I don't think that he'll ever be in the status of this where he's going to be like a second best player on the team or anything. But nonetheless, at his age, there's still room for him to make a surprising leap. If you go to the Milwaukee Bucks, so they win the title in 2021. Giannis is the best player in the world. They're crowned as sort of the team to beat, just like Denver was last year. But the 2 years for them after that have been somewhat, in my opinion, catastrophic. 3 years, I should say. Number one, They lost Middleton after the run. He gets injured. He has a tragedy in his life. The wheels kind of come off for him personally, and also obviously he's not able to play. That was just bad luck, and that happens. And this is, if you look at Milwaukee, maybe Denver went through that before the championship. Denver, if you just look at what happened to them from 2020 to 2023, in between there, it was really bad luck, man. Losing Michael Porter and Jamal Murray. Hopefully their bad luck, knock on wood, is out of the way. In their follow-up season, their title defense, they lose in Game 7 in the second round. So, similar, they lose to the Boston Celtics, they get blown out, similar to Denver getting killed by Minnesota and blowing the lead. They fire Budenholzer after 2 hangover seasons. Denver was to 1 hangover season with Michael Malone. They're going to go into another season, their second one with him. One of the storylines is he around after that? Does Denver have to win another title, or how far do they have to go for Michael Malone to stay around? That's one of the questions. They fired Bud after 2, so their arc kind of went in that same way. A team got tired of Bud. It was pretty public that he had lost the locker room. They fire him. But they hire a new upstart coach, AJ Griffin, and it's a disaster. Even though the team was winning a lot of games, it was a disaster. They also make a major trade in that they get rid of Drew Holiday, who was a core piece and probably underappreciated piece, and they bring in Dame Lillard, a flashy superstar, and obviously they've gone belly up. I worry about the Milwaukee Bucks. I worry about him because I think we just saw with Drew Holiday how good he was on a great team and how he's the type of winning player. Drew Holiday and KCP, 2 players to have 2 championships in the last 6 years. That is meaningful. That's really meaningful. And I look at Denver and I think, when you think of KCP, are they going to re-sign him? Milwaukee and their fan base did the unfortunate thing of undervaluing a player like Drew Holiday. And then he goes to another team and wins a title, and you go, you're kicking yourself. The Lakers are probably doing the same thing. They let KCP go, and they see him win with Denver, and they're like, what were we doing? That was such a key piece. So I worry about Denver in this KCP piece. I'm on record saying I think Denver should go into the second apron and not fear the second apron if it means keeping that core together. I understand that the bench are going to have to bring those guys and get them minutes, but my plan personally for the Nuggets would be to run it back with this group, go into the second apron and say, you know what, we don't need the flexibility later in the season if we have our starting 5 and we have a clear path for the guys off the bench, Christian Brown, Peyton Watson. We're going to stagger more, play those guys more blended minutes. To me, that's a good plan. And I think that there's a real chance that Denver could regret not having KCP next year when he's on a team that can help them win a title. A la Drew Holiday. But they get a new coach. They get a new superstar. And now if you look at the Milwaukee Bucks, me personally, I look at them and I say, are they more likely to win the title in 2025 or more likely to fall apart in such a way that Giannis's future there is uncertain? To me, it's definitely the second one. And Denver should probably learn from that and say, hey, it's a risky game in this business when you try to make drastic changes and drastic moves. So the Celtics, they fall flat last year. They get humiliated. They make some bold decisions and they end up winning it all and becoming the best version of themselves. Milwaukee wins. They make a bold decision. It goes belly up. This just shows you how tough it is in the NBA, even when you have a great player, how hard it is to win. All right, let's take a break. On the other side, I want to talk about what it means that Monty Williams was fired despite having all that money on his deal. We'll talk about that on the other side. First, I want to tell you about FanDuel Sports. Summertime means baseball. Also means going outside and touching grass, but baseball, if you're into baseball, and you can bet it and all other summer sports on FanDuel. Right now, new customers get $200 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. So there you go. You got to win the bet. You place a $5 bet. And if you do, $200 in bonus bets instantly. That's $200 that you can use to bet everything. Well, you can't bet Finals MVP. Summer League MVP, you could probably bet on that one. To who's going to hit one out of the park this summer at Coors Field. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon. And add a big win to your summer bucket list. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. We'll be right back with more Locked On. Back here, final segment. I'm Adam Mattes flying solo for you today. And the last thing I wanted to talk about, so Monty Williams, everybody saw, was fired. I don't have the numbers in front of me. Monty Williams is fired for 1 year into his huge deal. He's the highest paid coach in the NBA. He coaches 1 year. It was extremely disappointing. That team's going nowhere. They bring in a new GM. Bring in a new GM who did not hire Monty Williams. He immediately fires him. By the way, Trajan Langdon, I'm told, very sharp. He was down in New Orleans. I knew him, and guys my age, I'm 40, guys my age, remember the Alaskan Assassin as a college basketball player. By the way, I miss this. I miss when we knew guys first as college guys for multiple year arcs, and then you were so familiar with them by the time they got to the NBA. Great shooter, Alaskan guy, just a lights out shooter. And now he's a front office member who I'm told is extremely serious, very quiet, very close to the vest, but very shrewd and has a lot of respect out there. But they fire Monty Williams. They leave all this money on the table. Now, here's the thing. Tom Gores, they still owe him $65 million. So I got the number here, $65 million. Tom Gores owns the Detroit Pistons. He's worth about $9 billion. The Kroenke's on the Denver Nuggets, or Stan Kroenke, I should say. He's worth about $16 billion, even more. What does it tell you that an NBA team is willing to pay $65 million to a coach who will no longer coach his team? It tells you that they are not concerned with money or the state of the financial health of the league. These guys are rolling in dough. Now, Tom Gores is one of the more aggressive NBA owners, and the Pistons haven't been good. This is one thing that I think if Stan Kroenke were in the room or listening to this and commenting under a burner, he would say, look, everybody wants you to spend and to throw money around, but Ballmer's been doing that. What have they won? You look at Detroit's been doing that. What have they won? Spending a ton of money in today's NBA doesn't always mean success. That being said, 65 million, like a lot of people tell me they signed Zeke Naji to that deal and now they're screwed. And I go, Zeke Naji's deal is nothing. Not that Denver's going to buy out Zeke Naji, but you can move a contract like that. He said, Jalen Pickett, why'd they do signing? He's owed $3 million. So the Pistons just paid $65 million to get rid of a coach. And Denver Nuggets have a guy on that might not work out who's making $3 million over the next 2 years. So if Denver has to buy it out, that price is cheap. I say that to say, one, when we talk about the finances in today's NBA, the Kroenkes are responsible to build the best team possible, especially in this tight window that they have Nikola Jokic. They're never going to get another one of these guys. So they have to maximize the window. And some of these expenses, losing money to pay for guys, is just the cost of doing business. And it clearly signals that teams aren't too concerned about it or beat up over it. So that makes me think that they need to spend on the margins here. The roster is always going to be expensive in this era. I don't know that they need to let the second apron deter them. You lose out on some of the flexibility on how you can trade. I've gone over this in previous shows, but the second apron isn't just about a tax and how expensive your roster becomes. You can lose future draft picks or compromise future draft picks. You can freeze future draft picks, meaning you can't involve them in trades because they get frozen. You have you can't make trades. You don't have as much flexibility to trade like 2-3 players for one and stuff like that. So if Denver went into the roster in the second apron because they brought back a KCP, the expensive part of that is not a concern. And in my opinion, the flexibility part of that is, if I told you at the trade deadline you lose KCP, but you had the ability to trade for KCP at the deadline if things were going bad, you would say, of course, then trade for him, bring him back. Well, I look at that and I go, well, what's the difference then if you kept KCP and you get to the trade deadline and you don't have the flexibility? It's basically arriving at the same point. I think Denver looks at this and says, your starting five was the best in the NBA or second best. We have to tip our hat to Boston now that they're the champs. Maybe the second best starting five in the entire NBA. And they underperformed in the playoffs. And part of that was because they were worn out because of bad management, in my opinion, throughout the regular season. But now you have Christian Braun, who's a third-year player and was very good at the highest levels, including in the finals last year and in the playoffs this year. You got Peyton Watson, who has a tremendous amount of upside and should be a huge part of your investment. What can you get for a Zeke Naji? What can you get for a Reggie Jackson to just give you one more player? I just look at that and I go, Denver automatically has 7 players that I trust. They're starting 5, Peyton Watson next year with a full year of development, and Christian Braun. That's 7 that I trust already. You don't need more than that. It would be nice to get one more, and I think Denver can get one more through their own internal development. But if you told me that was their roster in their top 7, I would say that's probably the best bet you're going to make on this Denver Nuggets team. So for me, I look at it and I say this signal today, and everybody has to hate it, by the way. Everyone has to hate whenever another team spends a ridiculous amount, makes a crazy offer, because then every other owner is looking around going like, dang it, now I have to sign my coach to that much. Now I have to be willing to spend that much or go into the tax. But I think the Kroenkes can look at that and say, this idea of flexibility, that feels nice, but you know what feels even better? Having a top 7 that can win a title. That's what I think Denver needs to do, and that's what I think the lesson is from the Pistons getting rid of Monty Williams. I see in the chat here, somebody says, and again, we don't have a backup C. What is the problem to understand that? I don't know. Maybe that was to somebody else. Maybe that was to me. I have no idea. I've said long ago, the backup center position to me is not an important one. You need to have somebody that you can go to, but it wasn't the center position that sunk the Nuggets last year. You need to spell Jokic. That's an important thing. But having a backup center, especially one that you spend money on, like you use resources to get one, whether it's a draft or whether it's you trading players to kind of bring somebody in. That's why I've said guys like Dario Saric to me are the backup center. You don't need a big lunking, big, in my opinion. You don't need a bunch of those types of guys. So for me, you need a bench. Jokic needs to be able to rest because your bench can play, not because your backup center can play. If you can play small, and by the way, Boston Celtics, yes, they had Al Horford for large portions of the year, but they also for large portions of the year had to start him. And you would go with guys like a Hauser or what have you at backup center, Cornette. So like Luke, Cornette's not exactly a player that people are like, we have to get a Cornette caliber player. It's just a guy. Denver needs to have minutes to spell Jokic, but it's not necessarily from the center position. At least that's what I believe. All right, everybody, thanks for hanging out with me today on Locked On. I'm done for the week, but Swipe and Matt will be back with more shows on Thursday and Friday. Thanks for hanging out. Hit that like button. I'll see you guys then.